Welcome back to Normalize PTSD. Today we have Ken Falk. Ken Falk is a bit of a legend in my community. He was founder of AT Solutions. He's founder of Boulder Crest. He's founder of EOD Warrior Foundation. And today he's going to tell a little bit about his story, who he is, and what led him to, I guess, where he's at now and working with veterans and first responders with Boulder Crest.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jonathan, for having me on today, and I'm happy to answer the call here and figure out what you'd like to talk about. I'll give you maybe the highlights of who I am. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My dad's from Chicago, my mom's from Pittsburgh. My dad got out of the Army and became a DC cop, and we ended up all moving down to Washington DC, where I kind of grew up, for my first 18 years of life. I left high school at the ripe age of 18 to play professional ice hockey. I went to Texas to play hockey, and it didn't work out for me. And a year later, when I realized my life was going nowhere, I decided to enlist in the Navy, and that kind of took me on my journey. Spent 21 years in the Navy, and about 19 of those 21 as a Navy EOD guy, and ultimately retired in 2002, just after the first wave of us, of folks went to Afghanistan, and then started a company, as you might have mentioned, AT Solutions, which a lot of the EOD guys kind of probably remember. It wasn't started to be an EOD company. We actually didn't get into the EOD work until the company was about 3 years old, and we were primarily doing work for the Pentagon on technology programs that weren't even EOD related. So it was kind of interesting because a lot of people that know AT Solutions and know me think it was an EOD company, and we started it, really to do non-EOD work, and ended up back in EOD work after all the IEDs started going off in Iraq. I sold the company in 2008 and left it 2 years later to pursue a master's degree. I'd never, although I had a bachelor's degree, I'd never really gone to college, and had a college alma mater experience. So I took a year off and went and did a master's degree at Georgetown University and started a second company called Shoulder to Shoulder. And just as that thing was like getting to be pretty good, my daughter came home from college one weekend and told us she was pregnant. And that changed my whole life. I'm semi-retired today, and have my two daughters, one in California, one here in Virginia near us. And the one here in Virginia has 4 grandkids, and that's what I spend most of my time doing today is, spending as much time with my grandkids as I possibly can, and then overseeing as the chairman of the board. I'm not the CEO of the organization, but as the chairman of the board, overseeing the fundraising responsibilities for Boulder Crest Foundation. So it's been a crazy life.
yeah, it's been wild. One of my favorite part of your book that I guess we'll dive into and eventually is you were a really hard charger in your younger years. You're really getting after it, and you might be beating yourself up a little bit, saying that maybe you weren't there as much as you wanted to be as a father. And now your ambitions to be an awesome grandfather. And I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. That's got to be exciting for all involved.
Yeah, it's interesting because we don't get to turn our lives back, at all, and the damage that's done, to our children, through multiple deployments and time away and missing soccer games and hockey games and all the other things we do as parents. You kind of get this opportunity when you have grandkids to do it better, and that's what I feel blessed to be able to do is to really take the lessons that I learned from maybe not being the greatest father and trying to be a better grandfather.
No, that's awesome. Okay, so at what stage did you really start getting involved with veterans, and what inspired you to do that?
Yeah, it's I think it's interesting because when you look at guys like me, it's not hard to understand why we want to help veterans. I think when I look around the veteran helping community, the people that impress me the most are the ones that don't really have the closest of ties with veterans. I met a couple girls early on in the war in Afghanistan who had started a nonprofit that today is known as the Boot Campaign, And these ladies had no affiliation with the military, but a huge heart and a huge amount of patriotism, and went out and were raising money to help send things to soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think, that question gets a little bit deeper when you're talking to people that don't have an affiliation. But for me, it seemed to be obvious. And I was here, my company, AT Solutions, was headquartered in Fredericksburg, Virginia, about an hour south of Washington, D.C. And when the first EOD guy lost his legs in Iraq and got medevac to Walter Reed Hospital, one of my closest friends was a sergeant major of that young man, and he was in Iraq himself, and he called me because he knew I was near D.C., and he said, "Hey, would you mind meeting this guy and his family at the hospital?" And I was honored. I was like, I'll be able to be there. I can be an ambassador. I can do whatever the unit that's deployed. And I got to the hospital, and there was no family there. And I'm talking to this young guy, and, it was the first, I'd been in EOD for 19 and a half years. I'd seen, we had a couple of Navy guys that were killed in parachute accidents, diving accidents, but I'd never seen a guy, laying in a bed with no legs. I mean, it was the first severely wounded, guy that I really ever met up close at that stage in his life. I'd met a lot of Vietnam era amputees who, were 30 and 40 years on with their injuries, but this guy was like barely breathing. He was on a trach. He had no legs. It was a bad scene for me. And I asked him, I said, "Well, where's your mom and dad?" And he said, "Well, I don't have a dad. My mom's in Kentucky. She doesn't have any money." All these kind of things start coming out. "You have any siblings?" And he said, "No, my mom's got a dog. She's trying to find dog care." Anyway, to make a long story short, I pulled out my credit card. I pulled out my cell phone. We called his mom, and I got her on a plane, and she was bedside the next day. And I just said to her, I said, "Let's not worry about money. That's the last thing I want you to worry about. Let's get you here." And truthfully, as a veteran of the first Gulf War, I'm thinking, well, this will all be over in 3 months anyway. It's probably the first and the last severely wounded EOD guy that I'll see. And actually that year we serviced about 11 more EOD families who had loved ones who had been blinded, burned, amputations, all those types of things.
Yeah.
And that's when we realized, my wife and I and AT Solutions were really funding the majority of the family travel. The government wasn't paying for families to travel to the hospitals. So we were funding the majority of all of that. And really we came to the conclusion that we just won't be able to sustain that. So that's when we started the Wounded EOD Warrior Foundation. And I think we became a 501c3 official nonprofit status in 2007. But from about 2004 to 2007, we were pulling all the money to support the community, wounded, out of our pockets.
There was a need, clearly, and once you saw the need, you took action, and that's awesome because I know the EOD Warrior Foundation has really impacted the community in a huge way. I mean, you can see it now. I think this year was the first time I went to the ball in about 10 years, and just the shift in support in the community of who all's out there getting help. You guys are leading the way, as well as making pathway for other organizations to come in and do the same.
Yeah, I'm really proud of what we did. We in 2013 we merged the EOD Memorial Scholarship Fund with the Wounded EOD Warrior Foundation, and then we dropped the word wounded because we knew that the community, was gonna have a tough time after these 20. I mean, we were at war for 20 years, and the deployments really haven't even slowed down that much. I mean, I know at least from my days or my Navy experience, my Navy connections, the guys are still out there, deploying, not necessarily to Iraq and Afghanistan, but other crazy parts of the world, and that takes a toll on people, and we knew that we're going to have a long-term commitment to this community, and I didn't want the foundation, and neither did the board of directors want the foundation just to be something that happened during the war, because we knew how hard it was to start it up from ground zero. So we grew a nice foundation. We had, when I left the foundation, we had probably raised and distributed somewhere in the neighborhood of about $14 million in that period of time. We had started an endowment. my dream was to have an endowment so that nobody had to start from scratch like my wife and I did. And I think we've left the community in a really good place for the future of how of how people will be taken care of by nonprofit organizations. And the interesting thing about it, and I think what I'd love your listeners to understand, is that the government doesn't do this. The government doesn't pay for your kids to get child care, and they don't pay for your kids' scholarships. And I mean, this nonprofit is really important. And I will say that during the war, the support from the EOD, active duty EOD community was amazing. And I do worry a little bit because the current generation and the next generation may not have this wartime experience and may not have seen their brothers and sisters bleeding on the battlefield. And I really hope, to your listeners, especially the EOD listeners, that we continue to grow this, make it a part of your personal giving, your CFC giving, and this foundation can grow and it can be there for you all, always.
Absolutely. And I think that takes a lot of great foresight to see that. I spend a lot of time talking with the new generation and the next generation of EOD techs just this last year at the ball. And it seems that there is a pretty good shift and transition from that wartime mentality to more of we're still deploying in small numbers to some pretty hostile environments, but not on the magnitude we were in Iraq and Afghanistan. So there's a big shift from that wartime mentality to more of a peacetime mentality, which, it's well-deserved and well-needed, but also we still need to stay focused on this aspect of it. And I think that the EOD Warrior Foundation is an example of what every community out there needs to have, because I've been talking to a lot of the first responders, firefighters, nurses, things of that nature, and they don't have anything at all. There's no federal funding. There's, at least us, when we get out, if it's medical reasons, we have benefits forever. We have established organizations like yourself, and it's like there's help. But I see like these other groups don't really have that.
Yeah, no, it's I've got a really good friend of mine who got severely injured when he was working for the CIA, and he was working side by side, with the soldier, and he doesn't get the same benefits as, the soldier that was injured next to him. And it's, I think, the military benefits are great benefits, but at the same time, none of them, whether it's, the agency folks who don't have that care or the military folks, none of the government benefits are enough. It's there's always something that doesn't get covered.
Exactly. And my experience with the VA is, one, they give you money, and it's like, okay, money without a purpose is pretty pointless. There's no education or like, hey, this is the direction you need to go. The next was, here's some medication. And I took the medication. It didn't do anything but make my mental state worse. And I was like, I don't want this either. So that's when I started my journey being like, okay, there has to be a healthier way of doing this, and something it's more, I like to compare it to like a diet. Like large people, they want to take a diet, so they take like an extreme course of action. Whereas I feel like if you take like approach where it's a lifestyle change and you change the entire conception of what you're doing in life, then it's more sustainable. And that's the approach that I wanted to go down. And that's what leads me to the next question. Boulder Crest. Boulder Crest was, I read the book. I'm assuming the retreat started before the book. And then can you just talk to how that started and how, it sounded like you gave 37 acres to some nonprofits to give them space to do some work, and then that evolved into you doing your own retreat.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's that at a high level, that's exactly what happened. We, from about 2010 to 2013, we had the worst years in Afghanistan for EOD amputees. And I wasn't working at the time. I'd taken that year off to go to college, and then just didn't have a job. So I was spending a lot of time at the hospitals. At one point, it seemed like about every 4 or 5 days, we had another amputee coming into the hospitals here in Washington, either Bethesda. If they were Marines or Navy, they normally came into Bethesda Naval Hospital. It's all one hospital now, but back then it was two. And if they were Army or Air Force, they'd go to Walter Reed. And that was if they were amputees. If they were burned, they'd go down to San Antonio, to Brooke Army Hospital, other place other, if they were stationed on the West Coast and their amputations didn't need as much care as maybe the more severe, they might send them out to San Diego to Balboa Hospital. But, long story short, my wife and I we were the age of the parents of most of these young guys and gals that were being injured. And we started bringing their families out to our house just to get them away from the hospital. Because you can imagine, even a simple family, meaning that you have a husband and a wife, a severely wounded guy and his wife, they have their parents. But if their parents have been divorced, you could have 20 or 30 people in these hospital rooms at the same time, and it's crowded. So we just thought, why don't we get them out to our house, come out to our house on the weekends and get away from this hospital setting, have a barbecue, stay with us, we'll drink some beers, tell some stories. And it's all going to be all right. It's just going to take a long time to get there, and we can all have those conversations. And that's what we started doing. We started hosting it out of our house. And anyway, it became like an every weekend thing. And as much as we loved it, we wanted to do more. And we couldn't do more in our own house for a lot of reasons, because a lot of the wounded guys started coming out to our house too. And our house wasn't handicap accessible. It was a 100-year-old farmhouse with stairs that went straight up in the air like a ladder. And, it was just wasn't friendly enough. So my wife, I came home from school one night. I was at Georgetown, and I came home from school one night. My wife and a couple of her friends were sitting around our dining room table, and they had literally drawn the picture of what Boulder Crest is today. And what do you think about donating 37 acres? We had a 200-acre farm. What do you think about donating 37 acres of the property and turning it into a retreat for these families? And I said, I love it, but let's make sure our whole family's good with it. We're giving away 37 acres of our land. That was worth a lot of money. We had to put up $1 million of our own money to go out and kick off a fundraising campaign. And, that was all my kids' inheritance. And I said, well, let's make sure everybody's okay with this. And I think, my wife, who came up with the idea, Julia, and then my two daughters, they knew how important this was to us. And they said, yes, we want to do this. And that's how it all started.
So when you first started, I think you touched on briefly in the book about nonprofits leading with their heart. And after reading the book and your all's approach, it really resonated with me that you guys started with education, by educating yourselves first on how to benefit, this group of people. What's the best course of action? What's showing the best results? And I thought that was great. From, I believe her name was Susie, the doctor who describes and discusses the ACEs, which I don't remember the acronym right now. It's
Adverse Childhood Experiences.
Absolutely. And then from PTSD to PTSG, Dr. Lawrence and them discussed that. And I thought that was really interesting. So how did you land on those two approaches? And how many were fails? I imagine that there were some things that you looked into on the way that you're like, that's not really the approach that we want.
Well, when we started the retreat, we had this idea that we would do two things with it. One, we would allow these families from the hospital to come out and stay here for free, take a break, get away from the hospital setting. And then the second thing we were going to do was let small nonprofits, which we had quantified as $1 million or less in annual revenue, to come in and use the retreat for their programs. And my wife and I thought we could give them the retreat, and we could also, raise enough money to pay for groceries and all the things they needed while they were there, cleaning costs afterwards, and all the things you have to do when people come and stay. So that was our plan. We did that for a year, and in that first year, I'd be lying to you if I say I didn't meet some nutcases. Everybody from acupuncturist, acupressure, to massage therapist, to horse therapist, to therapy dogs. Just a strange group of people, all with great intentions, but none of them with a plan on what it actually was that was going to allow people to get better. And I just, I've worked really hard to get where I'm at. And I thought, if I'm not going to spend my retirement life just giving people a good time, if you're going to come to Boulder Crest, you're going to work hard to get into a better place. And I know it's possible because I've done it myself. So that, combined with our youngest daughter, who had a little bit of a mental health breakdown in high school, and we witnessed firsthand, how shitty the traditional system is. Those two things combined basically got me reading books on PTSD. And finally, I just said, listen, I've got time, I've got the money, I'm going to go around the country. I didn't drive, I ended up flying. But I'm going to fly around the country and meet people who are doing PTSD work and just find out why it's not working. Because everybody I talked to kept saying it's not working. We're over-medicated. The talk therapy doesn't work. And I'm not talking just the patients. I'm talking providers were telling me this. So I went to Harvard. I went to Chicago. I went to these top universities, San Francisco, UCLA, San Diego. And every person I talked to basically said the same thing. Oh, yeah, what we do for veterans doesn't work. The veteran suicide rate, was at a 10-year high. There were 22 veterans a day, they said, taking their own lives. We've lost more EOD guys to suicide than we've lost on the battlefield in the last 20 years in a war that was all about disarming bombs. So it's a problem. It's a problem. And I just said, I can't live with this. And finally, I ended up on this journey. I had done this initial research to map out my journey, but on the last stop of my journey, it was at the University of North Carolina with, you mentioned Dr. Lawrence Calhoun and Dr. Rich Tedeschi. And Tedeschi and I were talking about his research, which was based on the science of something called post-traumatic growth. And at the highest level, what that means is what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, meaning that you can thrive in the aftermath of trauma, regardless of what happens to you. And I believe that, like I said, because it's happened to me personally. I broke my back. I lost my mom when I was 7 years old to cancer. I broke my back. I lost my dad a couple of years later. I mean, I've held very, very close friends in my arms while they died. I mean, it's like I've seen really bad shit, and I know that you can do better in it. You can learn from that and become a better version of yourself. And that's what I believed in Tedeschi's research. But most of Tedeschi's research was based around families who had lost children to cancer. So I asked him, I said, have you ever done anything with the military? That would really resonate with my audience, because most of the people I talk to today are either active duty or former military. And he said, well, we studied prisoners of war from the Vietnam War. And then he had my attention, because I thought, well, I personally, even as much as I've thought about it today, I can't think of anything worse than getting captured on the battlefield and tortured. To me, that's got to be the worst of the worst. And Tedeschi, kind of agreed with me on that. And he was telling me that about 30% of Vietnam vets came home from war with PTSD, which arguably is true for your generation. And he asked me how many prisoners of war that I thought came home with PTSD. And I immediately said 100%. And he said, nope, that wasn't it. He said, but why did you say that? And I said, well, I've been in combat and I've been to SEER school. And I'm thinking, I just can't think of anything worse than that scenario. And he said, well, that's interesting. But it wasn't 100%. So I said 90, 80, finally got down to 30%, thinking maybe they were on par with their peers. And he holds up 4 fingers. And I said, what do you mean 4? 4% of them? And then he said, yeah. And he goes, and I'll blow your mind one more time. The 4% that came home with diagnosed PTSD were the ones that were in captivity for the least amount of time. So these guys like Everett Alvarez and Charlie Plum that were in for 6 and 8 years in these prison camps and tortured and starved. And I mean, all the crap that they went through came back. And when you're with them today, they're the most positive people in the world. And that was the story of post-traumatic growth. And I thought, well, if they could get through it, we can teach anybody to get through it. And that's really what we've set out to do here at Boulder Crest. We've created this whole series of programs that focused on the science of post-traumatic growth, and we teach people how to thrive in the aftermath of trauma.
No, that's amazing. That stat jumped out to me, and I even wrote it down, put an asterisk next to it, because I was like, I can't believe that. And then I just started thinking, how does that resonate? And then I kept reading your book and saw your all's approaches that won't kill you, will make you stronger. And ironically enough, I was talking to a guy last week, and he mentioned, he's like, if you ever feel down or you're feeling bad or you're feeling that PTSD kick in, he's like, read a book about a POW in Vietnam. He's like, that'll change your perspective real quick. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, absolutely. And then for that to be in the very next episode, which is talking to you and then reading your book and how PTG got started, and it was based off looking at veterans in the Vietnam War, I was like, okay, there's something here. So PTG was the concept of if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. So once you applied this, I think the next thing that you guys saw a correlation to was ACE and the ACEs and how it impacts, and it's related to childhood trauma. A lot of the veterans that were going through the programs were dealing with childhood traumas.
Well, listen, I think it's, childhood trauma is interesting. There's definitely a direct correlation between childhood trauma and PTSD. None of us escape childhood unscathed, right? So in the science of adverse childhood experiences, there's somewhere between about 11 and 18 adverse experiences. Those are things like poverty, neglect, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, divorce, things that happen in the average family. I mean, 50% of Americans get divorced. You're not getting out of,
Right.
out of jail free, out of childhood free. It just doesn't happen. They say the average American has one ACE score, meaning something happened to you in your childhood. Maybe it was a divorce, and maybe you had great parents, but they divorced and that left a mark on you. Maybe it was neglect. Maybe your parents both had to work and they were never around, and you were sent from childhood to, daycare to daycare, whatever it might be. But then there's a lot more severe things. There's families and people that join the military looking for a way out, and they're coming out of some really shitty places. I mean, poverty, divorce, drug use, alcohol use. I mean, we had a young guy come through one of our programs at Boulder Crest. He was in 12 different foster homes as a child, and all of them were abusive. So,
Yeah.
there's some really bad shit that happens out there, and a lot of it, for some reason or another in this world, a lot of it ends up happening to kids, and those kids join the military. So what we tell everybody at Boulder Crest is, your trauma starts at a really early age. And if you think of trauma, as kind of the rocks in a rucksack on your back, every time something happens to you, these rocks just kind of get heavier and heavier. And finally, at some point in time, it just takes you down. And what we do at Boulder Crest is we basically give people an opportunity to come here, dump that rucksack out, and just repack the rocks that are important. Because the truth is, we can't change anything in the past. None of us can. We're going to live with those things forever and ever. I remember after I broke my back, I had nightmares for 3 months. I used to wake up at 2:01. I'll never forget this. I've journaled about it and saved all these journals. At 2:01 every single morning, and all I could smell was JP5, jet fuel, from the C-130 that I jumped out of. Because the last thing I remembered before I landed and broke my back and got a concussion and all that was the smell of the jet fuel coming out of that C-130. And it was in Puerto Rico. It was hot. It was humid. And that happened to me, and it's never going to go away. But what we do here at Boulder Crest is after we empty that rucksack, what we tell everybody is there's really three things to living a great life. One is learn how to live in the present, how to be there for each other, and how to listen well, how to be there and be ready to help yourself and anybody else that might need your support. Setting goals for the future, and not long-term 5-year, 10-year goals, but short-term goals on how you want to get better and what do you want to get better in and why, understanding all of that, and then being able to reflect on the past. But, the past is a place for reference. It's not a place for residence. And what I tell everybody is when you think about depression, specifically depression, it's really about being stuck in the past. And when you think about anxiety, it's really about worrying about the future. So if you can get these three things right, living in the present, being there when you need to be there, reflecting on the past and planning for a future, you're still going to struggle. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You may open up the door and life's going to smack you in the face somehow. I don't know what it might be. Somebody might hit your car. You might spill your coffee in your lap. Your dog might have to get put down. Your grandmother might pass away. All those things happen to us. But if you can learn those three things and get a couple other things right in your life, like a good support network, specifically, you can live a really good life regardless of the trauma that comes your way.
Absolutely. One of the things you touched on in the book, I thought, and kind of resonated with me a little bit, is changing your perspective on struggling. Instead of seeing you a victim of a situation or a struggle as being a burden, see it as an opportunity to get stronger. Like lean into the struggle. Struggles are what make people better. What makes us better as people. That's what I took from it. And another thing that I was going to touch on is one of the tools that you guys use is, I guess, to kind of break the habitual habits from childhood traumas is multi-generational impacts, and how I believe you spoke about a Marine who, he's raised up in an abusive alcoholic family and home, and lo and behold, he's now a Marine with PTSD issues, and he's an alcoholic, and he's aggressive. And then you guys had that MOS practice where you guys talked about my old story, and then brought to his attention this multi-generational trauma that's going to keep going if he doesn't make changes. And it ended up with him not drinking ever again.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to break the chain, right? I mean, there's no doubt that we inherit, some people think it's genes. I don't believe that. I think we inherit behaviors. And we replicate them, and that when we have a comfort feeling with the way people that we respect or grew up with behave, we find that to be okay behavior. We do it ourselves, and I think at the end of the day, that story about that Marine is one to understand. And I'm not saying you can't drink. I mean, I love a glass of scotch, now and then, but I mean, I grew up with an alcoholic grandfather, and nothing's worse than seeing what alcoholism does inside of a family. It's terrible, especially if it becomes physically abusive. It's probably one of the worst things you'll ever see in your life, and it's okay to do things. You just got to do them in moderation. And one of the unfortunate things that the military does is, at least in my generation, is drinking was really encouraged. It's in the OD community. If you weren't one of the guys drinking beer under the tree on Friday night, if you were going back home to your family, you were looked down upon, right? You weren't one of the guys. You weren't one of the cool guys.
Right.
And when you're in a community of high performers, like we were, you want to be one of the guys. You don't want to be one of the nerds that's on the outside of all that.
Yeah.
So it's important, to make sure that, you do things that, really are good, good for the soul, for your soul. I keep a book on my desk called Man's Search for Meaning. It was written by a psychiatrist who was a Holocaust survivor by the name of Viktor Frankl. And the idea, Frankl's idea here is that when we have meaning and purpose in our life, and when you understand what that meaning and purpose is, regardless of what comes your way, you can live a great life. And, the Holocaust survivors weren't unlike the Vietnam prisoners of war. I mean, these were men and women who went through some horrific trauma, and many of them just came out, much better than they had gone in. And I think we have to learn from that. We have to understand that.
It's funny you mentioned that book. I just got it in from Amazon like 2 weeks ago. It was one of those that was recommended too. So it's on a short stack to get to.
It's a great book. It's an easy read. I probably read it 8 times. I've got dog-eared, cornered pages and underlined and highlighted and all sorts of stuff. But it's good. And I've always liked Frankl's work and the fact that that he's put it into into words that I can understand was really helpful. He was asked a question at the end of the book. He was asked a question about expressing into one sentence the meaning of his own life, and he said he thought about it and reflected on it for quite a while. And the one sentence that he thought summarized his life was that the meaning of your life, not only his life but all of our lives, is to help others find the meaning in theirs. And to me, that's kind of where I feel like I am today at Boulder Crest, and the work we do here is that, once you understand the meaning of your life and why you've got to the place you've got, then it's just a matter if you really want to get better, it's just a matter then of being able to do the hard work associated with getting better, because none of it's easy. It's the easy part of life is not to work hard,
Right.
but to work hard is very challenging, for many, and that's what we teach here at Boulder Crest is, what is the things you have to do to work hard and to live a meaningful life, not a happy life, because happiness, I tell everybody, is happiness is a manifestation of satisfaction. When you're satisfied with the things that you do and how you behave and how you live your life, happiness will come. But to try to live a life of quote unquote happiness, it's an impossible dream. You just never catch your own tail. It's like a dog chasing his tail around. It's like finding this meaning and purpose and having satisfaction that that you've done something productive and you found a purpose. That's what makes for a meaningful life, and then happiness manifests from that.
Right. No, I agree. So I was going to touch on a little bit of what I got out of your book. When I read it, I tried to apply like anything that, I don't know, everything that you talk about into my own personal life. And looking back on it, the thing that really, I guess, I pulled out of it, the biggest part was training and retraining. And in my mind, I took it all the way back to like, the ACEs and the ACEs and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, so I feel like in my life, I was raised in a impoverished like environment as a kid, as well as there's a lot of drugs and alcohol in my family, not my immediate household, but like my uncles, aunts, and grandparents and stuff like that. So that was, in my mind, the training of me. So as a child, that's how I developed dealing with negative situations. And then I evolved into an adult, and I saw a little bit of that trickle back into my life, and that's how I just naturally leaned to negativity and negative situations, was going back to what I was taught to deal with. And now I'm at a stage in life, as well as a lot of people in my circle, that they're in a place now where they're trying to retrain. It's like when negative things pop up, they don't automatically go back to those. They do healthy habits. And you talk about a lot of those things in the book too, which I found really helpful. Like, you gave me new ideas of what I think you used, wellness habits? I believe that was the phrase that was used. And I felt like that was a really awesome part, at least for my process where I'm at in life. Like, that was the most beneficial for me out of the book. But I feel like this book can be applied to someone that has no idea where they're at with PTSD. It's a starting point, and I feel like it's a really good read. It gives you an idea in the way that you guys articulate it, and everything's backed behind deeper science. A lot of people can't reference why they're doing what they're doing, and I feel like you guys have a little bit more substance to you because you can.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I think we're really happy with the book. We're I co-authored it with a guy named Josh Goldberg, and Josh spends a lot of time with people doing training courses around the subject of the book, and we're really happy with the stories that we hear back from how it's helped people. But it's listen, humans are the product of training, and that training starts when we're born. And what's the difference between a good EOD tech and a bad EOD tech? It's normally the amount of training somebody's received. Has nothing to do with the smarts and how smart they are, or how good looking they are, or how long they've been in the community. I mean, I can remember, very young EOD techs, that worked with me that were 10 times better the technician than guys that had spent 20 years in the career field. And because they worked hard, they just didn't assume that everything that they knew or learned at Indian Head was the answer. But these young guys were out there working hard, and we had a lot more money towards the end of my career where we could send guys to national laboratories for training. And, the harder you train, the better you get. It's just the way it is. The more you practice, the better you get. It's, and you look at these books like Tipping Point, the 10,000 hour rule, and all these things about what it takes to become great at what you do. And that's the same with life. If we worked as hard, to live a great life as we did on other things that we wanted to be good at, then we wouldn't have as many problems as we have in this world. The other challenge in this world is that 80% of human thoughts are negative. So how do we switch our negativity to a more positive? And think of that, that percentage, to you and your listeners, on this podcast, think of that percentage. I mean, 80% of our thoughts are negative, meaning that we start, whenever we think about something or an action, we always put a negative spin on it before we put a positive one on it. And think of that as you talk, to your friends. But imagine what the world would do. Imagine what it would do for you as a human if you flip that narrative to 80% of your thoughts being positive. And that's when I say, my goal is to be a better grandfather than I was a father. So I wasn't an abusive father. I mean, I was gone a lot. Neglect is one form of abuse. But at the end of the day, I'm 60 now. I'm not 30 like I was when I was raising my kids. I've got a lot more wisdom in me than I had 30 years ago. And now it's a matter of teaching my grandkids, the things that I've learned. How do we change my grandkids' thoughts so that they can become, 80% positive thinkers instead of negative thinkers? And that's what I hope to do as I continue to age and be able to share this wisdom, because I think it's, I spend my whole life, and this is all I do now, is trying to figure out how people can live better lives. And I think, we've come up with a couple of ideas, but I think, I continue to do research and see. And by the way, none of this stuff is new. I mean, this stuff dates back to biblical times, and medieval times, and, native times, and, cavemen times. I mean, people say, well, post-traumatic growth is new. It was only found in 1995. And I said, bullshit. If post-traumatic growth didn't exist during the Ice Age, humans would be dead with dinosaurs. Right? It's like, it's not new. The story of struggle to strength has been around for millions of years, and the story of failure. When you look at people who are very successful, I'm a huge hockey fan, and when you watch, I'm watching all the playoffs. The Stanley Cup starts tonight, but when you watch the playoffs and you see some of these older hockey players talking, they talk about their failures and how those failures led them to be much better players. Michael Jordan's another great example, one of the greatest basketball, if not the greatest basketball player of all time. And when you talk to and listen to Michael Jordan, he talks and celebrates his failures. And people who aren't successful, they never do that. They try to hide their failures. They don't embrace the failures. They don't celebrate the failures. They don't work on making them better. But when you see the difference normally between somebody who's been very successful and somebody who hasn't, it's normally the person who's been very successful has failed over and over again and learned from those failures and just become a better version of himself or herself as she's going along.
Exactly. I think we became a society of instant gratification, and you spoke on it earlier. The long path isn't always the easiest, and it has the best results, but it takes a little bit of effort. And I have to agree with I think the negative consequences of not failing is harder and more impactful on a person's mental state than the actual failing. So it's like the fear of getting started is more impactful. And I just want to touch real quick on the conclusion of the book, which I think is going to conceptualize a bit of the retreat that you guys do too. There's 4 points. One's review your past experiences, understand them, integrate them, and occasionally review them and share them. And that goes a bit on point with what you just said. Learn from your mistakes, grow from them, and continue on. The next one was cultivate wellness practices in areas of mind, body, finance, and spirit. If you could maybe give an example or talk to that just a little bit.
Yeah, we've looked at, when you look at traditional wellness programs and around the world, most of them focus on 3 areas: mind, body, and spirituality. We added financial wellness into our model at Boulder Crest, because we had seen, hey, listen, at the end of the day, we're Americans and we need money to live. We're not in a country where, other people are just giving you stuff. You've got to get up every morning, you got to go to work, you got to make some money and be able to buy groceries, put gas in your car, pay a mortgage, pay your rent, whatever it might be, right? We have to make money. And one of the things that we've noticed, if you think of all of the, the drama surrounding PTSD and depression, anxiety, really it's kind of the way stress in our bodies are manifested. Why do you have nightmares? For 3 or 4 or 5 months or 5 or 6 or 20 years after an accident happens, it's because we can't get that stress out of our body. And there's ways of doing that. And that's what, we try to work on at the Boulder Crest. But one of the stressors that'll, literally, drop the strongest of men and women is financial stress. When you spend more than you make and you get upside down and you can't make, your commitments whole, it starts to put a lot of stress on you. We've actually seen some suicides where maybe the financial burden that the individual had created on his family gave him, the idea that, maybe not being here and not having that financial burden on me and my family getting my insurance policy might take some of the pressure off all of us. And they think that there's a way to kill. So that suicide's an option at that point. And we basically, no different. We know that there's ways of getting out of debt. But, at the end of the day, those are the 4 areas we focus on. We talk about our mind. We talk about really being able to be in control of what we're doing. And when you meet a lot of people that are suffering with PTSD, you see them that they're living this proverbial life of what I call the tail wagging the dog. That they, every small thing just throws them off course. And how do we gain that control of our mind? Well, we teach things like meditation and getting good sleep. Those are things that start to allow you reading. Not spending all your time on social media, not being so negative. These types of things are what really allows us to gain that control of our mind and our body. I can't begin to tell you how many of our veteran brothers and sisters that, aren't serving anymore and getting up every morning in PT and have got so fat and so obese that the rest of their lives are going to be miserable. So somehow taking care of our body and, that starts by some exercise. It starts by, the nutrition of what we put in it, the drugs and alcohol we put into it, whether they're prescription or illegal or legal in your state, whatever that might be. Finances, again, not making more or not spending more than we make. And I think I would tell everybody, people that like to spend money thinking if they buy stuff, it'll make them feel better, is that material solutions, things, cars, houses, bicycles, things don't solve our spiritual problems. If you can't get solid spiritual, belief of some sort in your life, your whole life will be about your ego. Because if you think about that wellness model, we demonstrate it in the form of a triangle with a circle in the middle. The triangle on the outside is our mind, body, and finances, which if you think about it, that's our ego. But in the center is our spirituality. And listen, I'm not a religious man, but I do believe that there's something, bigger than me around. Something's done something, and right. The way we quantify spirituality is really 3 ways. The first way is our character. Are we really the person that we say we are, or are we living, 2 different lives? The second element of spirituality is your relationships to others. Do I have? We refer to it as your 3 to 5. We believe that you become the average of the 3 to 5 people in life you spend the most time with. So do you have a good 3 to 5 people in your life that you can aspire to be like? And then the third element is service to others. And when I say I'm not religious, I grew up as a Catholic, but I don't have a religious faith per se. But I do believe that about 2022 years ago, some guy named Jesus, walked the earth and had a pretty good message, which was treat people the way you want to be treated and take care of those who can't take care of themselves. And I think when you do that, when you do things for others, especially people that are in really bad ways, and sometimes it's not even just people, but animals. I have a friend that, all of his volunteerism is focused at a local animal shelter. And when that guy walks out of the animal shelter, although he may have seen some sad things during the day, he's feeling like he really did something for somebody else. And that service to others is really important. And if you are really religious, and to get closer to your religion and behave the way your religion it told you to. It tells you to, not to be living these, multiple lives, and it's just crazy the way. And then once you do things that that are out of character or that are outside of your religious beliefs, then you start carrying all this guilt and shame, and it just becomes another burden for you to carry, another rock or 20 in your rucksack. So, I don't think life's hard. I do think it's hard work, but I think the secrets of life aren't hard, and I don't think there are any secrets. I think they've been written about, since man could write. I think they've been written about, and I think the Bible is one, great place to start, with hearing lots and lots of different people's opinions, and books like Viktor Frankl's and Struggle Well, and Sebastian Junger wrote a great book called Tribe, which talks about, the military life and coming home from war. But all these books are a great place to start. But at the end of the day, if you don't get up every morning and do the hard work, it's not going to work for you, no matter what anybody tells you to do. It's just the individual's got to do it. You can't go to a therapist, you can't go to a psychiatrist for drugs and expect that just because you got a pill or just because you're talking to somebody once a week, they're going to fix you. It doesn't work that way. The only person that can fix you is you. And some people can give you advice, and some people can share their experiences, and you can form your own opinions around that. But if you don't get up every day and do the hard work, you're just not going to have a great life.
Exactly. I had a lady come on just the other day to do some meditation breathing, and she said something that I thought really resonated well with what you were saying. And she was talking about breathing, but I think you can apply it to everything. She's like, well, it's simple, it's just not easy. And I think that that's the solution to almost every problem. It's a simple solution. It's just not always easy. Not pretending to be someone you're not, being that person that you wish you were, and things like that. Or to touch on the relationship point that you hit on, it's, shrink that down. You don't have energy to entertain 20, 30, 40 friends. Shrink it down to 3 to 5. Have those 3 to 5 be healthy people. You don't want to keep toxic people around, because that toxicity is going to manifest itself in you somehow, So those are all great points. And then in closing, just want to talk about your foundation and who can go to this retreat.
Yep. So we actually have 2 retreats now. We have Boulder Crest, Virginia, where we started, and we have another one in Arizona, in southern Arizona, south of Tucson. It's open to combat veterans. Our programs are open to combat veterans, first responders, and their family members. You can see more at bouldercrest.org on the specific programs that we offer. But those are really the 3 categories. We do allow Gold Star family members as well. So even if your loved one was killed in combat, and in our minds, you still have an affiliation with our community, and you're welcome here as well. But we focus on combat veterans, and we focus on those who have honorable discharges, because we are a small nonprofit. We firmly believe that those that served us the best should get the priority, and that's really what we do.
Okay, next, about how long is the retreat, and how much does it cost?
Well, there's no cost to any of our programs. We still have a family respite program, like I described earlier on in the podcast, where families can come here and stay free of charge for 2 to 7 nights. The cost of that program is that the family has to get here on their own dime, and while they're here, they have to buy their own groceries. But our PTSD related programs, our post-traumatic growth related programs, all of those are free of charge. We pay travel to get here. We pay for all your meals while you're here, all that kind of stuff. So there's no charge to the individual. How long are they? Okay. They range. Our family R&R is 2 to 7 nights. Our Warrior Path program is 90 days. That starts with a 7-day training session here at one of our retreats, and then the 90-day period of time is all done online and through additional phone calls and Zoom calls and those types of things.
That's where I was going to go next. So to sign up, you go to the website. Is there a waiting list or anything along those lines?
There is, because these programs are not what I would call acute care, meaning that if you're suicidal right now, or if you're not feeling well right now and you feel you've got to get to a mental health facility, my personal belief is go to the VA, as much as people hate the VA. And I say that because at least at the VA, there's cultural competence. you may find good mental health professionals out there. I think they're few and far between. Personally, I found some great ones, and they help us here at Boulder Crest. But there's a lot of knuckleheads out there too. It's a very strange profession for me to recommend people to, and that's why I always say that if you're hurting now or you need support now, get to a hospital, get to a VA hospital if you can and you're eligible, and if not, get to another hospital where you can seek out high quality care. And because we're not an acute care program, meaning that you can't call me today and get into a program tomorrow. Right. One of the things that we do is our average wait time is between 2 and 3 months. And we think that that's good because as people start to understand the science of post-traumatic growth and they go through some of the pre-training coursework that we do with them in that waiting period, it becomes pretty clear that people who are going to be successful in this program will have the patience to wait. And this isn't easy. I mean, to come to this program, you're going to have to work hard, and I think it's
and you
people can tell you their story.
Swallow your pride. That's the first part. It was the hardest part for me. Be like, all right, I need to get help. And something else that I really find amazing about your all's, organization, what you do, is it's not catch and release. There's actually follow-up program, which I think that's where you have to get the most success from, is because it's not like, okay, here's some tools, goodbye. It's like you guys stay in contact afterwards too. Hold accountability.
Yeah, well, that's what I started to say earlier. I couldn't envision a retirement career that where I was just paying for guys to come to the Blue Ridge Mountains and have a good time weekend. I'm well beyond that now. If you want to come to a Boulder Crest program, and I've been out working my ass off raising the money for you to come here for free, you better come here and work.
Right.
I want to see you get better. That's what motivates me to keep doing every day, to get up in the morning and go out and raise more money for these programs, is when people do the work. The people that don't do the work, and it's few and far between, but we have a bunch of people. I call them professional wounded warriors, guys that just want to go from one free trip to another free trip.
Yep.
And they feel like the country owes them. And I don't owe you shit. You raised your right hand. You volunteered to do this. And I think it's, maybe that's a little bit of hard love, but I don't owe anybody anything. I mean, I don't even know a mortgage on my house anymore. So I definitely don't owe anybody a free trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains, but I'll give you one if you make me a deal and you come here and you work your ass off to become a good American. And that's our mantra at Boulder Crest. Yep. Come home from war and be the productive member of society here that you were on the battlefield. And if we can do that, I'll pay for it. But if you can't do that, if you're just looking for a free trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains, there's a lot of nonprofits out there that'll take you hunting and fishing. I'm not one of them. And as hard as that sounds, I think it's important to understand. There's an old saying in the world of healthcare that the cure is often worse than the disease, and that's what happens with PTSD. If you want to get better, I guarantee you the cure is harder than the disease. You can sit back and have everybody feeling sorry for you and be a victim, but at the end of the day, it's all workable if you get up every day and show up as the best version of yourself. And that's not easy to do when you're struggling, and I know that. But if you come to our program, you'll learn how to do that, and then it's up to you to go home and actually do it.
Yeah, I think it's easier at the end once you get comfortable being that person you're pretending to be. It's easier to be that person, as well as they don't call it a comfort zone for nothing. It's comfortable. And it wasn't until I got purposeful with intent of getting better with PTSD that I started seeing results. So I think that's amazing. And I want to circle back to, you mentioned families. You take families that are supporting PTSD individuals. And I think that's amazing because you briefly talk about your wife at the end of the book and saying, like, you wouldn't be able to be where you are and do the things that you have if it wasn't for her. And I feel like I've had a couple people on that, they've said the same thing. I wouldn't be able to get through my PTSD if it wasn't for my spouse. And then there's not a lot of resources that are really well known out there for spouses. And I wasn't aware that you guys had families come too. And if you don't mind just maybe hitting on what you guys provide for them, and if you know of any resources off the top of your head that are specific for those groups, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. Well, our tagline here at Boulder Crest, our marketing tagline here at Boulder Crest for years was Healing Heroes, one family at a time. And my wife, obviously I've been married 40 years now, and my wife, my wife understands the Navy life. She understands the veteran life, and this, to her, this was all about the family. And listen, PTSD is contagious. If one person in the family's got it, everybody's got it. It's hard. It's hard to be a caregiver. It's hard to be the parent, the child of somebody who's suffering. It's going to rub off on your family members. And our programs are designed to work. We have couples programs, we have family programs, we have spouse programs, alone. So all of those programs are all on our website, and you can learn a lot more and apply for them that way. But you can't just heal one person in the family and expect everybody's going to automatically change. You've got to do something for everybody.
Just before, I guess we'll wrap it up with how do others get involved, and how can we help your organization, I guess, get bigger and better? Is there anything that we can do to help?
Yeah, well, we're working hard to get bigger and better. We've got a curriculum that's getting scaled out. We have about 9 partners, other nonprofits who are delivering our program, our Warrior Path program, which is we call it our flagship program. Partners in Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, Maine, Arkansas, and Washington State right now, and then our places in Virginia, Arizona. So we're trying to scale. We're a nonprofit; it's all privately funded. Any financial help's always great. Even if you don't have the capacity to do that, maybe somebody in your network does. So sharing our Facebook post and LinkedIn post and Instagram stuff is always helpful. So. I think really the best thing any of you can do for us is take care of yourselves and take care of your family and friends. I think that makes for a much better world, and we'll always get through the fundraising struggles. But I think what I hope, especially for the EOD listeners, the people I've spent most of my life with over the last almost 40 years now, really is to see this community heal from these last 20 years of war would be a blessing in disguise.
Absolutely. And you just hit on something that reminded me of another point in your book, and it was who to help first. Start most local, and that's with you. Help yourself, and then after that, help your family and your friends. After that, your community, country, and then higher purpose. And I think that's the best way to put it, because you can't be the best version of you for others until you're the best version of you, period. Yeah.
I'd go one step further, Jonathan, as we end the kind of conversation. I would say that you can't help other people unless you're helping yourself, unless you're healthy. So it's important to get help. It's important to get healthy to be a good helper, and that's why we start with that circle.
I think Josh's story he mentioned on that. I think the guy's name was Dusty. And he said it the best, and it made me laugh so hard while I read it. And it's a bit vulgar, but it was unfuck yourself before you help others. And I was like, that's exactly what that he goes to talk about. He's like, he was right. I had to, and he did. And I felt like that was a really good movement, like powerful moment. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap up the podcast. And if you don't mind, just stay on just for a minute, and we'll just chat a little bit afterwards.
All right. Thank you all, and thanks for interviewing today.
Thank you so much. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you for joining Normalize PTSD. I don't know about you all, but when I talk to people like Ken, those individuals inspire me. Those are examples of like where I'd like to be eventually. And after talking to him, it's I guess it boiled down to me anyway that it's not one big decision or one perfect idea. It's a constant choice to make the tough decisions, to do what you need to do what you have to do, to be available mentally and physically at the moment for an opportunity to arise, So it's just being prepared and ready to get after it. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Hope you guys have a good one. Thanks.